We have some guests in the audience for a panel discussion I would like to invite up, please. Thank you to those who have joined us this afternoon, we small but mighty few. We had a very large contingent at our festival yesterday, and we had a very late night after party with filmmakers, so I think people are still kind of recovering from that, but I appreciate everyone who is here. My name's Kurt Lidke. I am board chair of Klamath Film and the organizer of the Klamath Independent Film Festival. And every year for our film fest, we open up submissions from filmmakers across the state in February, and we receive a number of films, go through the process, and every now and then we get films that follow similar themes. So yesterday we had several films about Modoc Wars and had a fascinating panel with Klamath tribes. And we got these two films submitted this year. One looking at first responder PTSD and one looking at military PTSD. And we thought this is a good opportunity to have a conversation. So we've invited some special guests to join us. First of all, Pat McAbery. Hello, sir. Pat, you are a firefighter and you are also the filmmaker behind The Ghosts They Carry.
That's correct.
How long have you been a firefighter?
Just finishing up 30 years at the city of Gresham.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for making the trek down from Gresham to join us. Appreciate it. And thank you for submitting your film as well.
Nice to have a chance to show it around.
The filmmaker behind Soldier was not able to join us. Justin Zimmerman was here last year, but there's a film festival that he is in Boise right now, but he sends his best regards. He wanted me to say that his film is 22 minutes long because every 22 minutes a military veteran commits suicide. So that's why. We also have two guests from Klamath Falls Police Department. Thank you so much for taking some time out to join us. We appreciate it. We have Aimee, is it Reichlin?
Yes.
Okay, I'm glad I got that right. Thank you. Sergeant Reichlin is with Klamath Falls Police Department and is a specialist with the peer support program, correct? And we also have our police chief has been kind enough to join us, Mr. Rob Dentinger. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. We tried also to get a member of our local military to join us as well that specializes in military PTSD. And for whatever reason, every single person is out of town this weekend. It's mind-boggling how that worked out. But thank you for the three of you for being here. Also, additionally, we have a microphone there and a microphone there if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question for our panel. But we wanted to have a discussion about these films and how real or how common of a situation this really is among first responders and among military. And I know it is a very common path. Not everyone, but it's a very common path that people go into military, and then after military, they go into first responder or police service. So I'm sure there's a lot of officers and firefighters that you work with or have worked with that had military background as well. So we can talk about that too. But in the course of your departments and your work, have you experienced PTSD directly, or have you had a close encounter with it with a peer? And how big of an issue is this?
I personally have experienced, my husband was a law enforcement officer. He has what they refer to as prolonged PTSD, which is PTSD that went on for such an extended period of time that it caused permanent damage to his brain, and he's no longer allowed to do his job. I think that I can probably speak for all of us. I think every first responder at some point has a certain level of PTSD that we carry with us from our jobs. It just manifests differently in each one of us.
I would going to add to that also that everybody has a scar of one size or another, and it's just based on our makeup and our personal history growing up and all these other things of how we deal with this. So as Tim, our therapist, talks about the backpack, and if you're somebody who just throws everything back there and never deals with it, then it gets full and you have problems with that. He has a fascinating thing when he does on some of his group work where he points out that a lot of folks that are in first responders were military and got married young and grew up in a house in chaos and all of these things that come through here. And it sets you to be able to be primed to work in chaos, which as a first responder, you have to be able to function in chaos, but it makes it so that maybe you don't know how to deal with that on your own. I'm the opposite of that. I grew up in a very stable house with loving parents and the whole 9 yards. So with that, I've been lucky enough to, when those things come along, I can deal with them without having to go and have to get any extra help there, but still get a lot of help from the other coworkers and things, because nobody knows it better than somebody who's in the business.
Yeah, I think everybody in law enforcement's, excuse me, gone through some kind of PTSD. I have a pair of shoes. My wife had a pair of shoes that I made her get rid of because it triggered an event that I kept remembering.
Could you talk a little closer?
My wife had a pair of shoes that I made her get rid of because it triggered some events, and I would remember from there. So
We've all in some way through life experienced things that have caused scars, whether physical or scars you can't see. But in your line of work and in military line of work, you're in the front line and you're dealing with sometimes the harshest realities of society. And oftentimes, whether or not it's traumatizing to you, the people you're interacting with, it's a very traumatizing event for them. I know you're supposed to be strong up front, you're supposed to be the front line, but how does that not affect you on a personal level, emotionally, with some of the things that you experience and some of the things that you see?
Well, it certainly does, and everybody gets affected by different things differently. And that's in the fire world a little different than the police world, that we almost always have other coworkers with us when these things go down. And a lot of times in the police world, they're by themselves having to do this. And sometimes you come out of one of these events and you're wondering, why did that mess me up and it's not messing anybody else up? Or the opposite of, that didn't bother me at all. Why is that bothering somebody else? And what's wrong with me that it didn't bother me? So everybody has their own little triggers, and you just never know quite what's going to lead from one thing to another. But it's that ability to talk about things just amongst the crew is a huge, huge thing here. I was intrigued when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, that there were a lot of police officers who were just leaving the job right then, just park their car and go. Or so the stories were, but no fire folks left. And I wondered why that was. And then I realized that if you're part of a crew, you might hit your limit and say, that's it, I can't do it anymore. And one of your buddies is going to say, oh, knock it off, we'll get through this together. But these guys are sitting in the car by themselves and don't have somebody to say, knock it off, let's just go do the next one, you're going to be okay. So, and I'll just, one little tidbit here, we purposely in our film didn't address police because I'm not inside that world. And I wanted to be able to speak very intimately about things, and because I'm next to that world, but I'm not inside of it, we didn't want to be insulting and using a single word wrong in any of this. So we wanted to make sure to have every word that's in that be the right word for that, so that somebody watching it's not going, these guys don't know really what they're talking about, because we're a pretty sarcastic, skeptical group. Anyway.
Well, the idea and concept of PTSD is still a relatively new one in the psychological world. You know, I think the first time that any sort of reference to it, it was known as shell shock post World War I, and these soldiers that came back so emotionally traumatized they couldn't function in any way, and now we've started to better understand trauma and what that can do to people and how we can deal with it. And they're still developing the concepts of it, but in military life and in fire and EMT and in police, there's I'm not one, so maybe I'm not the best person to speak about this, but the outsider perspective is that there's a certain, maybe for lack of a better term, machoism surrounding it, or a mentality, an alpha male mentality where you have to act like nothing bothers you. So how has that changed over time to make sure that those who are serving in these positions are being taken care of when they do need help?
So when the chief and I came in to law enforcement 20 plus years ago, we came in a culture where we were taught from our training officers, from our administration, this is your job, this is what you do, you just need to deal with it and move on. Because we didn't, you don't handle a call a day in your 12-hour shift. You'll handle, you may on some days handle 10 calls, you may handle 50 calls. And so that was the culture that we grew up in. And then eventually we started noticing, that maybe we weren't that resilient, that we are human, that things do bother us, that you can't be expected to go, to a call where there is an infant unresponsive and then turn around and go to a domestic and turn around and for your brain to just be like, okay, everything's great. So you started noticing more law enforcement, first responders that were being diagnosed with anxiety and depression. But those were huge taboo words. And you never wanted to, even if you had been diagnosed with that, you never wanted to let anybody know that, let alone let anybody know that you had maybe been put on anti-anxiety medication or depression medication, because it was our belief that as soon as your administration found that out, that they would fire you. They'd make you find a different job. You'd have to leave because that was a weakness within you that maybe you wouldn't be able to, to respond to these calls. So for years, we kind of sat back in hiding, taking these medications and going to counseling on the outside, not letting anybody in your inner circle know. And then probably 10 years ago, you started finding things, which I've worked quite a bit with actually, Tim, through WCPR, which is the West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat, which we found with our family 13 years ago. It is a first responder retreat that they send firefighters and law enforcement to that have been exposed to or are suffering from post-traumatic stress injury. And so I got involved in that. At that time, the chief was our detective sergeant. And I was working in our detective division, and I went and kind of talked to him about it. And he helped kind of to help bring that culture into our department way back, I guess kind of before it was cool to do it, before all the cool kids were doing it. And so, but even now, when I look at research, there still is only about 10% of law enforcement in the nation that have actually brought peer support groups into their culture, because a lot of them still live on that old school culture of, this is your job, this is what you do, you just need to deal with it. For me, it was easy being a girl. If I got emotional or, we came back to the office and I was angry and frustrated and I shed tears, my guys would just be like, oh God, she's such a girl. It was so much easier for me. It wasn't easier for them. But fortunately though, because of everything that I have put into it, my guys felt very comfortable coming to me, and I was that outlet for them to talk to. And so it kind of helped open up that dialogue within our department. And now here we are, 10, 12 years later with a phenomenal peer support system, a phenomenal culturally competent clinician that we've brought on. And we are slowly getting our officers healthier and healthier mentally and physically.
Yeah, running a police department isn't anything different than running a business. When you're looking at the business side of it, we're losing cops, and we have hundreds of thousands of dollars invested into their training, invested into their equipment. So for us to, not take care of emotional issues they're having, it's not good business. I mean, we lose people. It takes us another 18 months to train another cop. We're just behind. So we're in negotiations now with the clinician Aimee talked about to just have a contract where we have a certain number of hours, and we don't know who goes and sees her. Anybody, families, daughters, wives, husbands, whoever, can go and see her. And the only time we ever hear anything is when we're getting close to the limit. So she needs more money. So it makes it really easy for people to seek treatment and seek help. And we talk about the backpack scenario is a good talk, but we always talk about our bucket, the bucket of crap that's in our head. And sometimes you just have to dump it out. And we as administrators in our police department try to find ways to do that. We allow our officers to work out on duty. We pay them to work out. We bring in, we had yoga for a while. We try to do a lot of different things that help them holistically, spiritually, mentally, physically. And we find that helps people succeed in their career. And it saves the city of Klamath Falls money in the long run.
That's terrific that there are programs that are available. We were talking before the film started. I was a newspaper journalist for many years, and for a time I was a journalist with the newspaper in Lakeview, and we had a police officer there commit suicide. And no one had any anticipation that it was going to happen. It just kind of came out of nowhere, and all of his peers said, I wish he had just said something. Have any of you experienced something similar?
Yeah, one of my mentors when I was a young police officer, he worked here for a number of years and then went to Portland and he committed suicide. You know, he just got really depressed, hadn't been to work for months, and just he didn't want to be out about. I don't know what triggered it, but yeah, he killed himself.
I think one of the interesting challenges in the business is that we're the helpers, and the helpers don't want to ask for help. And that came home in my department when the gal that was really spearheaded our peer support program, so obviously somebody who's into it really understands it. She had a child and then had some postpartum depression from that and was withdrawing and maybe not coming back to work and all these things and wouldn't reach out for help. Here's the person who set up the program for her peers to have help, and she wouldn't take it until somebody called her out, which is what it takes, and said, hey, you made this happen in the first place. Let's take advantage of what you put in place. But so to get somebody who's not, even when you have somebody that engaged in it, who's not willing to ask for help, to get the folks that aren't that engaged in it to be willing to ask for help is probably the biggest challenge in the whole thing. And where the culturally competent clinicians comes in. So she mentioned it. That's one of my biggest things in making the film here, having heard people talk about going to just the average counselor and being told, oh, so you're in trouble at the fire department, so just go to a different station. It's like, it's the same administration. Oh, well, then go to a different department. You don't do that. You have to start over again. Well, that seems awfully harsh. Like, so, you know, stories like that, and the many hundreds of stories, or Todd's thing of, well, if it sounds like that sort of call, tell them you can't go. So you just don't want to deal with that anymore. So finding somebody who you can talk to who understands the schedule and the whatever, because it is so different than real life.
I'm glad to hear that there are things available to officers and first responders that need or want as a stress reliever. We all have stress in different forms, be it family issues, personal issues, or work-related issues. But your line of duty, as well as military line of duty, you are susceptible to more traumatic experiences, typically. Speaking in generalities, but it is the line of duty, right?
Yeah.
That if you are encountering someone, most likely it is a traumatic situation or potentially a traumatic situation. So to hear that there are therapists and yoga and holistic opportunities for people where that could help as a stress reliever. I remember a few years ago, I interviewed a firefighter over at Kingsley Field with their department here. And he said that the way that he decompresses every time after a call is he takes a quick shower. He said, sometimes I take 7-8 showers a day. But that's my way to wash myself clean of that call and that experience and to start over fresh again. What are some of the other things that you find are your way to cope with some of the stresses and experiences that you have to deal with day in, day out in your line of work?
I won't be as long as that. On the fire side of things, just being part of a good crew. So it's that kitchen table is where almost every problem gets solved. And lots of very dark humor and laughing about horrible things, but also letting stuff out and just knowing you have somebody there to be with you. So it's that camaraderie is huge. And in this day, now that people are getting more aware of this, having people come up and pull you aside and say, hey, you're not right at the moment. And so it's things like that that is the big difference over the pull your boots up and keep on going. So I'm done. I finished early.
We do a lot of debriefs within our department, especially for major critical incidences. Sometimes we do them with myself and our chaplain and the shift. Sometimes if they're big debriefs, we'll bring Ann Kellogg, who is our clinician, in, and she'll run the debriefs. For me personally, it helps that I have a husband that understands the culture. But I also have a close relationship with my parents. And Rob makes fun of me because I talk to my mom every day when I drive to work, and I talk to my mom every morning when I get off work. But it helps though, because I can talk to, my dad was a Vietnam vet, so my dad understands trauma, and my mom and I are close, and so I can talk with them, and so I'm able to kind of clean my cobwebs out every day when I come to and from work. And I do think that being able to openly discuss and talk about things helps to kind of release that trauma from just compacting within my brain.
Yeah, my house is my soft spot. Going home to my wife and my kids is the only. I mean, we don't talk about what happened, but just for me to know that life isn't like that all the time. There's a place to go where everything seems normal. I can see and deal with trauma and violence and blood and guts all day long, as long as I know that I have a place that I'm going to go to that's going to be normal. So it's definitely my house.
As an administrator too, you're overseeing a lot of, I don't know how many officers exactly you oversee in the department, but
We have about 40 sworn.
so you have about 40 officers that you have to see and you schedule and plan. But if you know there's an incident and you can tell that someone is not right, do you step in and be like, hey, you need to take a day?
Yeah, we do. We put people on administrative leave just to clear out their head. I mean, when we think that, we have, unfortunately, we've been kind of averaging about an officer involved shooting about every 18 months in this community now, which is getting pretty traumatic. And we deal with that. We watch people as they process it. And if we think that they're not having a good time with it, or if they're struggling, we'll put them on administrative leave and say that, you're required to go see Miss Kellogg for 2 sessions before you're going to be able to come back to work. The legislature's also put some restraints on us. So if somebody that's involved in an officer-involved shooting, they're required to go see a clinician at least once. We have to offer them 2 trips, but they're not allowed to come back to work until they've been seen once by a therapist.
We have a question over here.
We've been talking about post-traumatic stress injury and disorder. I wonder what kind of training you have for recruits, like this is what you can expect. This is what it will feel like. If you feel these kinds of things, sort of running them through before the incidents happen.
So there is a Department of Public Safety Standards and Training, which is where law enforcement goes, both road officers and corrections deputies. They now do I don't know how many hours it is, but there's an entire curriculum that they cover in regards to trauma, about how to recognize it within other officers. So that's something that's completely different from when we were up there. They have now started using it as part of their curriculum and teaching it to the new recruits that come in.
And we're also required to put everybody through a psychological exam. And that's one of the factors they look for is people that are able to or not as well as coping with stressful situations. They won't pass the psychological.
On the fire side, it's a little different because each department is a own culture and own training that they'll do. And so it just really matters on the culture of the department, whether there's peer support there, whether they feel supported or not. So that it's not as uniform as the police world has. So in Oregon, all the police officers get trained in one spot, and the fire world, we're all trained in individual locations. So not as steady across there, but it's becoming more talked about, and that's the very first step of the whole process.
So I'm glad to hear that there are programs in place and there are ways to help, but what are things that we could do better, or what are services that are needed to assist to make sure that people in your line of work or military that may need help can get help? Is there something that we should be doing better? Or I know if funding was not always the barrier, but like what things could we possibly do more of to ensure that people are being taken care of?
It's just getting the awareness out there. It is and we do, I think, within our department, and I know I can speak for Fire District 1 because I work pretty close with Denny Roberts, who is their chaplain, and they do have a peer support program as well, and are trying to get their peer team up and running. So, but it's about just being open and honest and training your officers to know if you're having a problem, it's okay. It's really, you know, they talk about, there's this whole movement called Humanizing the Badge, where we try to, you know, they try to put things, they did the lip sync thing a couple of years ago where, you know, it's getting really the community and the culture of public to understand that, you know, underneath this uniform, underneath this badge, you know, this is what I do for a living, but I am a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister. If I get cut, I bleed just like anybody else. So, you know, understanding that we have bad days too. We have stressful days too. And expecting us to be perfect is an unrealistic expectation, and it adds stress and it adds frustration. I'm not going to handle every call perfectly. There are going to be situations where somebody is going to push that right button and I'm going to, you know, become frustrated and yell at you. I mean, that's just, that's, you know, I mean, I am human, and understanding that, um, and, you know, us being able to pass that on to our younger officers, that it's okay to be human. It's just understanding, though, that if you are reaching that point, you need to come to one of us and say, hey, I think I need to take a step back. And also, as a senior officer, being able to grab that junior officer and say, you know what, I can tell that this one is maybe a little more personal to you. Let me go ahead and handle it. You know, you be my backup and let me go ahead and deal with it.
Yeah, and everybody's aware that we're not the police departments and law enforcement isn't probably as get a glowing review like we used to 10 years ago. It's difficult. The society has shifted their opinion of law enforcement in a lot of ways. One thing in 2021, when we were having the riots and defund police and all that stuff, one of the things that made my day every day was there's this little old lady that would stand out in front of our gate, and every time a police car would drive by, she'd just hold up the sign that says, "We love you." I mean, it was like, wow, that's pretty cool. So just thanks, you know, that kind of stuff helps.
We have another question over here.
You said, or I guess it's common that ex-military go into first responder positions after the military. And if coming from the military, especially after a war, is filling up your backpack, I wonder if there have been any studies where you find that people without a military background, without any war experience, do either better or worse if in coming into these professions.
Yeah, I don't think you can do a study on better or worse. It's just how people deal with things. We have officers that have never been in the military that are outstanding and deal with trauma and deal with all the stuff we do very well. And we have guys that have been in the military that are the first ones to get kind of upset and kind of, you know, because maybe their backpack started a little fuller. But again, we go back to the psychological exam where we make everybody go through it, and they have to pass this, and that's what we're looking for, is people that aren't able to handle stress, people that have, you know, anger management problems and that sort of stuff. But you just never know. It depends on the person.
Pat, what was it that ultimately inspired you to make a film on this topic?
Well, working with my partner Denise O'Halloran, who was a paramedic in the Portland area also, and we'd done a previous film earlier that's available on Amazon about the early EMS history in Portland, and which is where the first women paramedics in the whole country came around. And I can go into that for quite a while, but don't want to do that because we're talking about a different film right now. But this was just a topic that was coming up, and we wanted to explore that. And I explained it as being sort of like a Pixar film where the kid and the parent are laughing at the same thing, but they're laughing at two different jokes. And behind me with this is I wanted to be outreach so that general public gets it at one level, but then first responders are saying, oh, this is coming from within the industry. This isn't somebody from outside trying to tell me what's going on in my life. This is from the inside coming out. The first time I met Tim, he was actually doing one of his, for lack of a better word, one of his canned programs for the Forest Service on this topic. And I had heard of him, but I hadn't met him yet. And the Forest Service had hired me to film the thing. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, there's no way this guy would know what's going on in here. About 3 minutes into his talk, I said, I could not pull anything over on this guy if I had to. So with that, for me, the real goal of it is to let my compatriots know that you don't have to go to the employee assistance plan counselor and have to educate them on what our business is. You can go to somebody who you can sit down with and who understands the shift, the work, what you've seen, and all these things, so that you don't, there's so much you have to build up there to get to where you can have meaningful conversation. If you start with somebody at that same level that truly understands and knows, then you can start healing much faster.
I think that's where we've had a big switch, is going from EAP, somebody that doesn't really understand the profession, to go into this Ann Kellogg, who we go to now, who's never been a cop and never done it, but she speaks cop fluently, and she's better at dealing with our officers, and we've seen a switch that now that we've changed from the just the regular EAP counselor to Miss Kellogg. People feel more at ease going to her than they have before, and it's starting to pick up as far as the visits go.
From a filmmaking standpoint, Pat, you made the film The Ghosts They Carry. I know Justin could not, he really wanted to join. He's like, why are there two film festivals happening the exact same weekend? And I got invited to both. So he came last year, and so that's why he's not here now. But I can speak a little bit in Justin's regard. I was also military very briefly. I went through 2 months of boot camp and then got hurt. But I have the scars on my feet and the emotional trauma from drill instructors to prove that I was in the Marines. From only 2 months and decades later, I still remember that trauma. But were any of you military before you joined your service, or no? Okay. But you work with people who were military, so you know we're around, and certainly here in Klamath, we have a very large military population because of Kingsley Field here as well. So I'm curious to know your perspectives on the individual that Justin portrayed in his film Soldier, how typical that may be of some of our military veterans. I know, not being veterans, you can't necessarily specifically speak on it, but you know, we have local services, VFW, DAV, veteran service offices and whatnot. We talked a little bit about like the alpha male persona and how that's coming out more, but for the for citizens that have gone into military service and have gone to war and have experienced these incredibly traumatic experiences, and in your lines of work as well, the incredibly difficult experiences that you encounter, how true to life or commonplace was Justin's portrayal of this individual to what you may interact with on a day-to-day basis with some of your peers or people that have considered going into your line of work? Rob, especially since you're an administrator, like have you encountered people that maybe have tried to apply and you see some of the warning signs that the soldier in Justin's film was portrayed as, and you're like, maybe we need to help this person?
Yeah, we
right?
we see some of that when we do interviews. Some people are a little more aggressive, I guess. I can't really speak to it as far as employees go. All of the employees we have that are ex-military are excellent employees. We haven't really seen anything like that. What I can speak to is that people that we deal with a lot on the street are suffering from mental illness and mental trauma, and a lot of them are ex-veterans, and it's really becoming a pandemic as far as we're concerned. I would say 95% of the people we deal with have some kind of mental trauma, and it exacerbates itself in violence and whatnot. But a lot of people we deal with are veterans.
Pat, I'm sure you, in the editing process, you've watched your film so many times, you're numb to it at this point. But maybe the Soldier film, or maybe you two can speak on the ghosts they carry in terms of perhaps what you took away from the two films about PTSD perspectives. Did it change your perspectives at all, or did you feel like, yeah, that's right on, or was there something missing from it that you think maybe people should know?
I think that we need more films like this. I think that it is far understated. Exactly. I mean, you can't match one up to the other. From a soldier's perspective, my husband was in the Marine Corps, and so I can speak from a personal perspective of the the process of traveling through the VA trying to get anything done is so frustrating. And I am able to maneuver that process for my husband. With my husband suffering from PTSD, it is extremely frustrating and painful and hard for him. And so I see how the people that we deal with on a daily basis, why they give up, because it is a hard process to maneuver through. But I don't think theirs is more kind of a single incident or a single trauma that maybe has sparked theirs, where for first responders, as far as law enforcement and firemen, we have what's called cumulative PTSD. So ours is, it can be sparked by one traumatic incident, but typically it is from years of going to traumatic and taking on not just what traumatizes us on a personal level, but also taking on other people's trauma. And so I think that these were both outstanding videos. I think that they both portray exceptionally what our military goes through, as well as what our firefighters and our first responders go through. And I wish that there was more stuff out there like this for people to see, to understand that, we don't just wake up one day broken, that it's years of what we're exposed to that break us. And I think that this is also something that would be important for, for other officers and military, personnel to be able to see that they're not alone, because that is the one thing that you'll hear a lot of them say is, I just thought I was going crazy until I heard somebody else say the exact same thing. And then I realized I wasn't alone.
It may have been individual incidences that we were covering in your film, Pat, and also the soldier film, but did you see, and I see we have a question up here too, but did you kind of see some personal experiences or things you've heard were like, oh, that's just like John, or that's just like Sarah, that, the same kind of experiences that have happened right here too?
Yep, absolutely.
We have a question over here.
It's not a question. I just like to make a comment on Justin's film. He hit the nail on the head when he said, they turn us into giants and then nobody wants you anymore. I worked with a lot of military folks coming back from these wars. And the best thing I could tell them was, granted, I've never been in the military before, but I know what you've been through. You're taught to harm, but then you let go, and they forgot to tell you how to be sensitive and kind again. So yeah, PTSD is real. We need more movies. We need more resources. For the suicide prevention, they just switched over from the 800 hotline number to, I think it's 811, where you can call in and talk to a trained counselor for PTSD. Thank you.
We found a surprise villain, however, when we were filming this thing and talking to our folks that were in the movie there. And everybody had stories about the trouble they've run into with the workers' comp system. And we're really starting to explore that more. We're getting ready to move this on to a feature length is what we're hoping to do with the thing. And Todd's lawyer, who deals specifically with these things at the time anyway, wanted to be in there to sort of expose what goes on when these folks do try to get help. And we're just sort of coming clear in our head, just in phone conversations amongst us in the last couple of days, that when somebody has an injury, whether it is a physical injury or not, workers' comp is going to send them off to a doctor, somebody that has doctor in front of their name, but this doctor, who probably doesn't specialize in whatever their injury is going down the list that the workers' comp says that they need to go down, and if they can do all these things, then yes, you're fine to go back to work. Doug's personal doctor, who's an osteopath, said, you're messed up, you have all these injuries, but workers' comp wouldn't accept that because he's an osteopath, which actually gets more training than an MD. So they sent him to all these other folks and making him drive hours and hours when he couldn't sit to go do these things. So we weren't looking for a villain, and we want to find what the other side of that also, because it's not fair to the insurance industry that we just throw everybody out to be taken care of endlessly also. But there's a bump in the road there that maybe the administrators don't even know, because a person gets into the workers' comp system and off they go. And maybe the doctors that are saying you're okay to work don't really have the background to be saying that.
We have just a couple minutes left, and thank you again, all three of you, for being a part of this. We really appreciate this conversation. To kind of wrap things up now, we've discussed some of the different possible effects of this and some of the programs that are available. For those of us who are not first responders or who are not military, but want to be supporters, what can we do? Is there anything that we can do to assist from a community level, from a society level, speaking in generalities, or on a local level, that we can do to make sure that our first responders are taken care of so that they can take care of us?
Yeah, speaking just basically administratively, our city and our community is very supportive of law enforcement, and there's not a lot that we need as far as this goes. I think it goes back to just showing the officers, law enforcement officers, that they're not the ones. You know, we're not the enemy. I mean, we're getting a kind of a bad rap lately just because of all the nationwide publicity against law enforcement. It's starting to turn a little bit. We appreciate that, but I mean, just thank them. I mean, what you see them in the store doing something. Hey, thanks for your service. Thanks for doing what you do. That goes a long ways.
One of my favorite memories as a journalist was covering an event in town where some police officers just had a pickup soccer game with some kids in a park. It's like, you don't have to be like on call, gruff alpha all the time. You can be like, hey, let's kick the ball around and just have some fun and let loose. So I'm sure those kinds of opportunity, you're in the service to protect and serve and be a part of the community, but oftentimes you're only dealing with the dark side of it. So how enriching is it in your career when you get to do those positive things? Maybe go into schools, maybe go to like your community events and be able to kind of let your hair down a little bit, or in Aimee's case, let your hair down a little bit, not Rob, but and just kind of still being on duty, but being able to relax a little bit, right?
I'm going to have Aimee answer this one. She's kind of our cheerleader here, community cheerleader, so she can take this one.
So we do a lot of great programs that allow our officers to get involved in the community outside of their jobs. So in December, we sponsor a program called Shop at the Cop. We take lower income families that maybe mom or dad have been laid off, or they're kind of running on some hard times. And we take their kids Christmas shopping, and we shop for everybody in the family. And our officers, the Sheriff's Department, Oregon State Police, Parole and Probation, we have brought everybody in over the years. And we started our first year, we took, I think, like 20 kids, and we're now up to like 55 kids. So that's 55 full families within our community that get picked through the schools. We do Junior Police Academy. We go into the schools and do talks. We really try to stay as involved in the community as we can. And it gives our officers an opportunity to get out there, to be involved with the kids and with our community members, and be seen, as their normal self, and not as, maybe the person that, had to come and, take mom or dad to jail because they had been involved in a domestic, or, were there because a family was having a medical emergency. And so it gives us an opportunity to really kind of be involved within the community, which we'd love to do. And it's super beneficial for everybody involved.
That's wonderful when you can personalize it and humanize it. I remember I had a conversation when I was a journalist talking to your predecessor, Rob, David Hensley, our previous police chief. And he was telling me a story about some people that, he's just driving through a neighborhood and people are like flipping him off and screaming F you. And he's like, what did I do to you? But then he had to stop. No, he's not saying F you to David Hensley. He's saying F you to the badge. And you have to kind of disconnect the two sometimes and realize he's mad at maybe what I represent, maybe from a personal experience or, just misconception of things, but he's not mad at me personally. And sometimes there's Aimee and then there's Officer Aimee, right? And sometimes you have to try to do your best to kind of separate the two, right? Well, we are just about ready to start our next block of films. I hope I haven't given our audience PTSD from this extensive talk about PTSD. But Pat, thank you for making your wonderful film, The Ghosts They Carry. I hope you stick around for the rest of the day, check out some other films.
Sure will.
And Aimee and Rob, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all that you do in the community.
Thank you.
I'm glad to say we're going to go to a few happier films now. So thank you for joining us for the 10th Annual Klamath Independent Film Festival.